there's quite a lot of comments on one of my recent videos, which was the interview with Kidani, about basically, like, I think some Yu-Gi-Oh players kind of talking about Vanguard and like teaching it and like people not liking it because of like luck mechanic and OTs and that kind of stuff. Like, you've kind of heard these arguments before. We've all kind of heard this discussion before as well. And I think it's not exactly like a new thing for Vanguard players, but it kind of reminded me of a topic that I've always wanted to talk about in TCGs that I think about a lot, and I'm really interested in this topic, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it too, which is agency in TCGs. So not agency like, freaking like advertisement agency or whatever. What I mean by agency is essentially being in control of how you express yourself. So like the agency in how you express yourself and how you relay your thoughts, or having that kind of like responsibility and control over what you do and how you do it. It might sound like a fancy word, but it really isn't. It's a relatively simple concept, but it basically comes from the reason why I want to talk about this is because, and I'd love to also, we're recording this live, I'd love to hear chat's opinions on it too, is because a lot of people argue that luck factors, such as, let's say, like security checks in Digimon or triggers in Vanguard, reduce the amount of agency because of the argument of why would my plays matter when luck changes everything, right? You've definitely heard this argument before where it's like, oh, like, why does it matter if like I'm gonna just lose to triggers, right? Or like, oh, I lost because of triggers, whatever. So it's like there's the agency to be able to make plays and win, and then let's say losing to a 6 damage OT or whatever, right? And a lot of players don't like that. So I kind of want to talk about agency in TCGs that I've played in the past that are big in the market, as well as, of course, Vanguard, and just kind of compare agency and luck and this entire argument. So I think overall, luck affects games without luck-based mechanics much stronger than you expect. So, and I'll give the immediate example of Yu-Gi-Oh, where Yu-Gi-Oh is an intricate game where there's a lot of interactions in each step, and it feels like a tug of war. It's a tug of war of resources where you have both of your opening hands, and that is like the tools you've been dealt. And you have high agency in Yu-Gi-Oh because each card does a lot, right? So your search card is also going to be like going to have some secondary effect, and then whatever you're going to pump out is also going to have a bunch of effects that can like respond to your opponent's plays. And so you have a lot of agency because you tackle those interactions one step at a time, or sometimes multiple steps at a time. And there's a loss of agency in Yu-Gi-Oh when you brick. Or let's say you go first and your hand is full of hand traps and you can't move, right? It feels like your hands are tied together. Or if you go second and you don't open any hand traps, now you can't do anything even if it gets to your turn and you have the plays that you normally would have been able to make. I think that's an example where even though Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have any inherent luck mechanics, the initial brick, because of there not being a mulligan especially, reduces your ability to actually do what you want to do in a card game tremendously in Yu-Gi-Oh. In Pokemon TCG, you fight with Pokemon and you take prize cards as rewards, and you have a total of 6, per game. It's like the backwards system of Vanguard, and you win by knocking out your opponent's Pokemon, and if you knock out enough to claim 6 prizes, then you win. And there's actually quite high agency in Pokemon as well, because you essentially see almost all the cards in a Pokemon game in your deck because of the fact that in Pokemon you draw a lot. They have cards that say like once per turn draw 7 cards. You draw a lot, you search a lot. There's a lot of ability to find the pieces that you want to answer certain matchups, even though you can't play during your opponent's turn in Pokemon. But you lose agency, for example, when you only open one Pokemon with like nothing behind it to switch into if it gets knocked out and auto lose. So that is basically, you lose that agency. So this actually happened to a player in a recent major tournament here in Japan who was 13-1. 13 wins, 1 loss in Top Cut, and he lost to a brick, right? And it's like going that far just to lose to that is like crazy. Now with Magic, I don't play Magic anymore to really give you accurate examples, but it feels kind of comparable to Yu-Gi-Oh, except with the addition of Mana Screw as well. And I think the whole point is that those games that we just mentioned don't necessarily have luck factors in them outside of maybe like prize cards in Pokemon. But I feel like their mechanics are most punishing when breaking happens and you no longer have control of doing what you want to do. Like you're no longer able to express yourself in the game because your hands are tied behind your back without necessarily asking you about it, right? And I think you know, more recently, like the more recent TCGs have included more luck mechanics, right? So Vanguard, of course, is not that new, but of course has the trigger element, and then Digimon, of course, has the, you know, security check mechanic. So an example is, you know, in Digimon, you have a shared mana system with your opponent, and the plays that you make dictate how much mana your opponent will have next turn or how little they will have next turn, and therefore you try to shackle yours and your opponent's plays in a way. And so you actually have pretty high agency because you are not only responsible for what you can do, but you're also responsible how much you're going to let your opponent do. So it's actually a very interesting tug of war. But of course, you know, bricks can happen. And most importantly, security check can deny lethal. So you can have lethal on board and you're ready to go for game, but you will actually win because your opponent got lucky and triggered something in their security, which is like their like life points kind of, or like prize cards, but you reveal them and activate their effects. That, let's say, like blows up your board, and then like just because of that, you can no longer win, and then your opponent gets to win next turn. So some people coming from like Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, don't like that because it's like, I had game on board, but I lost to a lucky mechanic. So I think that segues really interestingly into agency in Vanguard, where I've been giving examples of games where you lose agency through bricking, right? Especially in Yu-Gi-Oh, I think that's where it's the heaviest, where it's like you go first and you open 5 hand traps and it's just GG's, right? And then Hax has also given an example of Duel Masters, which, if you don't know, is one of the biggest card games in Japan, because there the security is also the same as in Digimon through shield cards, and I've heard that it also has some, you know, pretty high agency in terms of what you do because you choose how you attack and when you attack and things like that. And also, there's another interesting point of Digimon is that you can choose when to take security, so you know when to take those when to take those risks or not. And I think that risk taking is a big factor in agency in card games as well. So going to Vanguard, like I've been explaining a lot of examples where like bricking reduces agency, but the standard format of Vanguard is very unique, where due to the ride deck, you actually essentially cannot brick. You will always do the bare minimum that your deck wants to do, from grade 0 to grade 3, and to do the things that ride line does. You will always do the bare minimum. You will never have an instance in Vanguard where you open your hand and you go, oh, I lose. Well, like that you will in Pokemon, or you will in Yu-Gi-Oh especially, and things like that, where it's not just comparing opening hands. You will always be able to play the game. And on average in Vanguard, each deck has a lot of search effects that raise consistency, and therefore the players feel more engaged and just feel more agency in their plays because you see more of the cards that allow you to express yourself, so you feel more agency. And because there's this much consistency in being able to do the bare minimum of what your deck wants to do, and the ability to play through seeing a lot of the important cards in your deck, there needs to be luck to balance it out, because why play card games if there's no luck involved? That's literally the whole point. Like, if you don't like luck in card games, you should play chess. You know, they have to balance out that high level of consistency and like lack of luck through triggers, and more recently, the over trigger, right? So obviously in Vanguard, the loss of agency is the OT getting checked is like the biggest example, right? Or the opposite is like, let's say you're the one offensively checking OT and your opponent just happened to have all 4 of their perfect cards in hand, which is a pretty like statistical outlier for the most part, and managed to survive that kind of play, right? Or like getting double crit before riding grade 3 and things like that, right? While it's technically you lose agency because you can no longer do your plays or like the bare minimum of your deck, it's technically also like partially your agency to choose to no guard that risk, right? Even though in the early stage the risk is definitely lower, right? But I kind of see Vanguard like a fighting game in this aspect, where you sort of have to make reads and take risks in the moves you make based on the information that is shown in the game between you and your opponent, right? So in fighting games, you're always kind of just like basically going back and forth, trying to read your opponent's patterns and then move in a way that punishes your opponent for what they do. And Vanguard, I feel like, is definitely like that, especially with things like damage denial. And so I like to always compare it to fighting games in that sense. But when it comes to the like way of losing agency in Vanguard, some TCG players, let's say Yu-Gi-Oh in particular, really don't like this, because you know, losing agency due to losing to a 6 damage overtrigger is like unthinkable. Like I would never want to play a game like that, right? And I think a part of that reason is because games where the loss of agency happens at the start of a game are more acceptable than at the end of the game, because of the fact that you are not invested. Because if you look at your opening hand and it's a brick and you know you lost, you just close the book and move on there, right? The journey's done, you're through, get out of here. Whereas in Vanguard, when you lose to your opponent 6 damage healing or 6 damage OTing or things like that, or like getting double crit mid-game, you're already invested in the game. You're invested in the journey of your gameplay that has blown up midway through or at the very end of it. So it definitely feels like it has a stronger impact, right? So games where loss of agency happens midway or at the end, like in Digimon or Vanguard, causes more negative reactions, I think, because of that investment. And I think it really comes down to how, like, which way you deal with it better. Would you rather sit down, see that you can't play and just give up and then do nothing? Or do you prefer to play the game knowing that there's a risk that maybe your best efforts will blow up in your face at some point, right? Card games will always carry one of those two, whether it's bricking and losing immediately, or it's a factor like triggers and a luck element that allows you to still fight until the end, even if the result might not be the best at the end of the day. So I personally prefer games where I feel like I'm 100% in control. And the reason why I'm making this video is that I feel that, like, I play a lot of card games. I play a lot of different TCGs. And I feel that Vanguard is the game where I'm in control by far the most. I feel like I'll always be able to play the game. I feel like I have the highest amount of agency, more so than when I play Pokemon, more so than when I play Yu-Gi-Oh, more so than I play other card games like Shadowverse Evolve, because I feel like I'll always be able to do the bare minimum, even if that means that sometimes my efforts will blow up in my face because of the way that the game is built, right? But at least I never have to sit down, look at my hand and concede because it's unplayable. And the fact that there's comebacks is a very, very important thing to me, which there's no comebacks from a brick of, like, you know, going first and opening 5 hand traps, right? And so I think that I personally prefer games where there's 100% feeling of agency at the beginning with the potential to lose agency at the end. And that's why I've played Vanguard for almost 12 years now. Right. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as well below. I know that this might be a bit more of a complex topic to break down, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and, like, which types of games do you prefer? You know, are you also with Vanguard because you like that kind of feeling that you always have a chance that even when your opponent is high rolling and you're kind of like eating shit, that you have a chance to come back because of the way that the game's rules are built? Or do you prefer Yu-Gi-Oh, where you won't have any luck shenanigans in the middle of the game as long as you get past the initial step of the opening hands? So let me know in the comments below, what kind of agency do you prefer in TCGs? I'd really love to hear your thoughts below, and of course the people in Twitch chat as well. So I think it's definitely a very interesting topic to discuss, and it's something that I think about a lot myself when I play different card games, for sure. So if you guys like this video, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. I'm trying to reach 100k subs here on YouTube, and we gotta push harder, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I would really, really appreciate that. But otherwise, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.